English title. My daughter threw away all my old things, calling them junk. She didn't know she also threw away her entire college fund. Vietnamese title. Con gai toi nem het du siu qua toi di. Goi chung la rak ruoi. No kong beat rang no kung de nem di ton bo qui hok dai hok qua men. The smell hit me first. Bleach. Sharp and sterile. The kind of smell that scrubs away memories. It was followed by the faint, chemical sweetness of fresh paint. My garage had never smelled like this. For 20 years. It had smelled of old paper, cedar wood, and the faint, metallic tang of forgotten things. It smelled of history. Now, it smelled of nothing. My hand was still on the doorknob, the one leading from the kitchen into the garage. I couldn't seem to let go. As if the cold brass was the only thing anchoring me to reality. My eyes scanned the space, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The concrete floor, once a cluttered maze of boxes and shrouded furniture, was now a perfect, uninterrupted slate of gray. It was clean. So horribly, terrifyingly clean. The walls were a fresh, stark white. Someone had painted them. Where were my boxes? The carefully labeled cardboard containers filled with first edition novels and rare comic books? Where was the hulking shape of the mid-century credenza, hidden under a dusty drop cloth? Where was the stack of vinyl records? My husband's collection, the one I couldn't bear to part with? Where was the old rocking chair I had used to soothe our daughter to sleep, its wood worn smooth by years of gentle motion? Gone. It was all gone. My breath hitched in my throat. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in my chest. I took a tentative step forward, my sensible nursing shoes making a soft, lonely sound on the bare floor. The echo was wrong. The space was too big, too empty. Felt like a wound, a hollowed-out part of my own body. Lily? I called out, but my voice was a reedy whisper, swallowed by the silence. Didn't even sound like my own. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. Lily. There was no answer. Single, frantic thought pulsed in my brain. A frantic drumbeat of denial. No. No. She wouldn't. She couldn't have. I had told her. I had told her how important it all was. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure the image of how it was supposed to be. How it was just 2 weeks ago. Trying to replace the scent of bleach with the comforting smell of home. 2 weeks earlier, the garage had been my sanctuary. My shift at the hospital had been a brutal 12 hours. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had flooded the ER. And the controlled chaos hadn't let up until well after sundown. My feet ached. My back was a knot of tension. And my mind was a jumble of vitals and patient charts. When I finally pulled my beat-up sedan into the driveway of our small house in Maple Creek, Ohio, all I wanted was 5 minutes of peace. I bypassed the front door and went straight for the side entrance to the garage. The moment I stepped inside and pulled the string for the bare overhead bulb, the stress of the day began to melt away. This was my world. It might have looked like a mess to anyone else, but to me, it was a library of forgotten things, a museum of potential. Every object had a story. Every piece was a promise. I ran a hand over a stack of old Life magazines, their covers depicting a world that felt both a million miles and a heartbeat away. Tucked in the corner was a disassembled brass bed frame I'd found at a farm auction, convinced I could polish it back to its former glory. Boxes labeled vintage glassware and ceramics fragile were stacked 3 high against one wall. It was my collection, my hoard, my secret investment portfolio, curated over 2 decades of early mornings at flea markets and late nights scrolling through estate sale listings. From inside the house, I could hear my daughter's voice, bright and animated. Lily, my 17-year-old force of nature. No, I'm serious. Maya, she was saying, her voice carrying clearly through her bedroom window. It's like living in an episode of a hoarder show. You can't even walk through the garage. I'm so embarrassed. If my mom brings one more piece of old, dusty junk home, I think I'm going to lose my mind. I winced. It wasn't the first time I'd heard her complain. To Lily, my treasures were junk. She was a child of the digital age, of minimalism and clean aesthetics she saw on social media. Her world was sleek, new, and disposable. My world was built on things that had already lived one life. Things that held the echoes of the past. I sighed, pushing the hurt down. She didn't understand. Not yet. One day she would. I pushed a box aside with my foot, clearing a path to the old workbench where I kept my cleaning supplies. I picked up a soft cloth and a bottle of wood polish, my eyes landing on a small, Eames-style side table I'd scored for $20. It needed some love, but the bones were good. The lines were perfect. I started to gently rub the polish into the wood, watching the grain darken and come to life under my hands. This was my therapy. Later, over a dinner of microwaved lasagna, the best I could manage after my shift, I tried to bridge the gap between our worlds. How was school? I asked. Lily shrugged, scrolling through her phone, which was propped up against a bottle of ketchup. Fine. We had a presentation from the Kent State admissions counselor today. My heart gave a little leap. Oh? And what did you think? It's okay. I guess. It's expensive. She said it with a finality that irked me. Lily, we've talked about this. You just focus on your grades and your applications. You apply to every school you want to. Don't you worry about the money. She finally looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed with a skepticism that was purely teenage. And how are we supposed to pay for it? Mom, are you getting a massive raise at the hospital that you haven't told me about? I have a plan, I said, trying to keep my voice light and reassuring. I've always had a plan for you. What plan? She scoffed, gesturing vaguely towards the wall that separated us from the garage. Selling some of that old stuff? A few dusty books aren't going to pay for a 4-year degree. I took a deep breath. I'd had this conversation in my head 1,000 times. The grand reveal. The day I would sit her down and explain it all. I get the official appraisals, print them out, and lay them on the table. I'd show her the stock certificates from the 1960s I'd found tucked inside an old book, which, after some research, turned out to be surprisingly valuable. I'd explain how that chipped ceramic vase was actually a rare piece of Roseville pottery, and that the collection of comic books was worth more than my car. I wanted to show her, not just tell her. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized that all the junk she was so ashamed of was actually her ticket to the future. A future I had been painstakingly building for her, piece by piece, since the day her father died. But the timing never felt right. She was always so dismissive, so resistant. I was afraid she wouldn't believe me. Or worse, that she'd see it only as a dollar amount and miss the point entirely. The love, the history, the legacy. So I just said, it's more than a few dusty books. Sweetie, you have to trust me. It's all taken care of. She rolled her eyes and went back to her phone, the conversation over as far as she was concerned. The silence that fell between us was heavy with everything I wasn't saying. After dinner, while she was shut away in her room, I found myself drawn back to the garage. The air was cool and still. I walked through the narrow pathways, my fingers trailing over the spines of books and the curved legs of old chairs. This wasn't just about money. Not really. It was about her father. He was the one who had started it. He loved the story and things. He'd bring home some forgotten treasure from a yard sale, his eyes shining with excitement. Look what I found. Sarah, can you imagine who owned this? After he was gone, I kept it going. It was my way of keeping him close, of continuing a conversation that had ended too soon. Every piece was a memory. The ugly floral armchair was the first piece of furniture we bought together. The box of vinyl records held the soundtrack to our courtship. And the newer things, the ones I'd collected on my own, they were my letters to the future. My promise to him that I would take care of our girl. I stopped in front of a large, flat file cabinet I'd rescued from a closing architect's office. I pulled open one of the wide, shallow drawers. Inside, protected by acid-free paper, was my collection of vintage movie posters. Casablanca, The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, each one a work of art, each one a small fortune. I closed the drawer gently. Lily didn't have to understand the nuances. She didn't have to share my passion. She just had to trust me. That's all I asked. I leaned my head against the cool metal of the cabinet, the faint smell of old paper filling my senses. This is all for you, Lily, I whispered into the quiet clutter of my garage. One day, you'll understand. 2 days later, the phone call came. It was my sister, Carol, her voice tight with a familiar, anxious energy. Sarah, it's Aunt Jean, she said, getting straight to the point. Carol was never one for small talk in a crisis. She took a bad fall, broke her hip. She's at the hospital in Cleveland, and she's asking for you. My heart sank. Aunt Jean was my mother's older sister, stubborn, fiercely independent woman who was now well into her 80s. She lived alone, 3 hours away, and we were her only nearby family. A broken hip at her age was serious. I'm on my way, I said without hesitation. I was already mentally calculating what I needed to do. Call the hospital to request an emergency leave. Pack a bag. Figure out what to do about Lily. She's going to need someone for a while after they discharge her. Carol added. Probably a week. Maybe longer. I'll stay as long as she needs me, I said. Can you check on Lily in a couple of days? Just to make sure she hasn't burned the house down? Of course, Carol said. Don't worry about her. She's 17. Not 7. She'll be fine. After I hung up, I found Lily in the living room, sprawled on the couch, watching some home renovation show. Slick, charismatic host was guiding a horrified couple through their cluttered home, his voice dripping with condescending pity. We need to clear out all this negative energy, he was saying, gesturing dramatically at a room full of family photos and mismatched furniture. We're going to declutter your life and give you a fresh start. Lily was watching, mesmerized. See, Mom, that's what our house needs. A fresh start. I didn't have the energy to argue. I have to go away for a few days, I announced, heading for my bedroom to pack. Aunt Jean fell. I'm driving to Cleveland. Lily sat up, her show forgotten for a moment. Is she okay? She broke her hip. She'll be fine. But she needs me. I threw some clothes into an overnight bag, my mind racing. I grabbed my purse and started checking my wallet. Cash, cards, driver's license. I paused. There was a $500 bill tucked into a hidden pocket of my wallet. It was my emergency fund, the cash I always kept on hand. On impulse, I pulled it out and walked back into the living room. Here, I said, handing it to Lily. This is for groceries and whatever else you need. There's plenty of food in the freezer. But you can order a pizza or something if you want. Just be smart. Okay. No big parties. Lily's eyes widened at the sight of the money. Whoa. Okay. I'm serious. Lily. Lock the doors at night. Don't let any strangers in. I was giving her the standard mom speech. But my mind was elsewhere. It was in the garage. Sudden, sharp anxiety pricked at me. It was irrational. Lily had never shown any interest in the garage other than to complain about it. But still, I walked her to the kitchen door, the one that led to my collection. I put my hand on her arm, forcing her to meet my eyes. I needed her to hear me, not just with her ears, but with her whole being. Lily, listen to me, I said, my voice lower, more intense than usual. I need you to promise me something. Okay, she said, her tone wary. I pointed towards the garage door. Do not touch anything in there. Do not move anything. Do not let anyone in there. Okay. I'm not just being paranoid. Those things, they're very, very important. I could see the familiar veil of annoyance fall over her face. The slight tightening of her jaw. The way her eyes darted away. Mom. I know. It's your precious junk. I won't touch it. The word junk felt like a slap. It's not junk. Lily. It's our future. It's your future. Do you understand what I'm saying? I was pleading with her, trying to convey a lifetime of planning and dreaming in a few desperate sentences. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion. Maybe. But it was quickly replaced by the mask of teenage indifference. Yeah. I get it. The future. It's fine. I won't go in the garage. Happy. I'm serious. I repeated, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Promise me. I promise, she said, exasperated, pulling her arm away. God. Mom. Just go. Aunt Jean is waiting. She was right. I was being ridiculous. She was a good kid. A little self-absorbed and moody, like most teenagers. But she wasn't malicious. I was just stressed and overtired. I gave her a quick, tight hug. Okay. I'll call you tonight. I love you. Love you too. She mumbled into my shoulder. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house. I could see Lily's silhouette in the window, already back on the couch, bathed in the flickering blue light of the television. I told myself everything was fine. I told myself she was a responsible young woman. I told myself she had promised. The drive to Cleveland was a blur of highway and worried thoughts about Aunt Jean. When I finally arrived, the hospital was a whirlwind of doctors, nurses, and the bewildering bureaucracy of modern healthcare. Aunt Jean was frail and in pain, but her spirit was as sharp as ever. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and told me she was glad I was there. For the next few days, I fell into a routine. I spent my days at the hospital, talking to surgeons and physical therapists, and my nights on a lumpy couch in Aunt Jean's quiet, lonely apartment, which smelled of lavender and mothballs. I called Lily every evening. She always sounded fine, if a little distracted. How's everything? I'd ask. Good. Everything's good. She'd reply. What have you been up to? Oh, you know. School. Homework. Just hanging out. On the fourth day, her voice was different. There was a strange, bubbly excitement in it that I hadn't heard before. I've been working on a little project, she said, her tone secretive and pleased. A surprise for you, for when you get back. A small alarm bell went off in my head. A surprise? What kind of surprise? I can't tell you. It wouldn't be a surprise then, would it? But I think you're going to love it. It's something you've wanted for a long time. My tired mind cycled through the possibilities. Had she cleaned the whole house? Done all the laundry? Maybe she'd finally tackled the overgrown weeds in the garden. Any of those would be a welcome surprise. Well, that's sweet of you, honey, I said, my anxiety subsiding. Just don't overdo it. Don't worry, she chirped. It's almost done. The house is going to feel so much better. A fresh start. Fresh start. The phrase echoed in my mind, sending a faint, new wave of unease through me. It was the same thing the man on the TV show had said. I tried to shake it off. I was being a worrier. She was just trying to do something nice. She was trying to please me. A week passed. Aunt Jean was discharged to a short-term rehab facility, and I was finally able to go home. The relief was immense. I missed my own bed, my own routine, my own quiet space. I missed Lily, even with her moods and her messy room. I called her from the road. I'm on my way home. Sweetie, I should be there in about 3 hours. Awesome, I can't wait for you to see it. She squealed. The excitement in her voice was infectious, and I let myself feel a genuine flicker of anticipation. She had clearly put a lot of effort into this surprise. Whatever it was. Maybe this was a turning point for us. Maybe she was finally starting to grow up. To think of someone other than herself. The drive seemed to take forever. As I turned onto our street, everything looked normal. The familiar houses, the well-tended lawns of Maple Creek. I pulled into our driveway, and the first thing I noticed was how tidy the front porch looked. The stray pots and the welcome mat were perfectly arranged. A good sign. I walked in the front door, calling her name. Lily? I'm home. The house was immaculate. The living room was vacuumed. The throw pillows were fluffed. And there wasn't a single stray cup or magazine in sight. The kitchen counters were clear and wiped clean. It was like a show home. In here. She called from the kitchen. She came running out and threw her arms around me. Welcome home. What do you think? Wow. Honey. It looks amazing. You must have worked so hard. I was genuinely impressed. And touched. That's not all. She said. Her eyes sparkling with pride. She grabbed my hand. Her expression like a child on Christmas morning. The real surprise is this way. Close your eyes. She led me through the pristine kitchen towards the garage door. The knot of dread in my stomach returned, cold and hard. Lily, what did you do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Just look, she said, her hand on the doorknob. You're going to be so happy. No more junk. No more clutter. I gave you your space back. I gave us a fresh start. She threw the door open, and my world ended. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The air was trapped in my lungs, thick and useless. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The freshly painted white walls of the garage swimming before my eyes. Lily's proud, expectant face was a blur. The only sound was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The sound of a circuit breaking somewhere deep inside my brain. Well? She prompted. Her voice bright and jarringly cheerful. She bounced on the balls of her feet. What do you think? I hired some people. It only took them a few hours. They took everything. Isn't it amazing? I finally managed to suck in a ragged breath, and it felt like swallowing glass. My gaze drifted from one empty corner to the next. The bare floor. The clean walls. Single, naked bulb hanging from a wire, illuminating nothing. A void. She had created a perfect, pristine void. Where is it? My voice was a croak. It didn't sound human. Lily's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion clouding her eyes. What do you mean? It's gone. That's the surprise. I got rid of all of it. All that stuff. What stuff? I whispered, taking a stumbling step into the echoing emptiness. The smell of bleach was making me nauseous. You know, the junk, she said, her voice a little less certain now. She followed me into the garage, her arms wrapping around herself as if suddenly feeling a chill. The old furniture, the boxes of books, all those weird dusty things. I called a company, ClearSpace Solutions. They have this great deal for a whole house clean-out. I told them to just empty the garage. It's what you've always wanted, right? A fresh start. Fresh start. The phrase slammed into me with physical force. I turned to face her, and I must have looked terrifying, because she took an involuntary step back. My hands were shaking, a violent tremor I couldn't control. You called a company? Yeah, she said, her voice small. I used some of the money you gave me. I thought you'd be so happy. I imagined it then. A big, rumbling truck backing into my driveway. Strangers in uniforms, their faces impassive, hauling away my life. Hauling away the armchair my husband, Michael, and I bought at a thrift store when we were first married. The one with the hideous floral pattern that we'd laughed about for years. hauling away the heavy oak file cabinet that held his architectural drawings, the ones he never got to build, hauling away the box labeled Lily's Firsts, filled with her first shoes, her first drawing, a lock of her baby hair. They would have seen a box of old comic books. They wouldn't have known it contained a near-mint copy of The Amazing Spider-Man 1, a comic I had bought for 50 cents at a garage sale 20 years ago, an issue now worth a down payment on a house. They would have seen a stack of dusty vinyl records. They wouldn't have known it was one of the most complete collections of early Blue Note jazz in the state. Michael's pride and joy. An investment that had appreciated more than any stock. They would have seen a clunky, outdated side table. They wouldn't have seen the graceful lines of a Charles Eames original, a piece that museum curators would weep for. What did you tell them, Lily? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I just told them to take it all, she stammered, the first tear finally welling in her eye as she registered the storm brewing on my face. I said my mom was doing a big declutter and wanted it all gone. They were really efficient. They even swept the floor afterward. I laughed. It was a horrible, broken sound that ripped out of my throat. It was the sound of utter despair. I laughed until tears were streaming down my face, until I was bent over, clutching my stomach. Mom? Lily whispered, her voice trembling. You're scaring me. I straightened up, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. The laughter died, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Scaring you? I said, my voice flat and dead. Good. You should be scared. You should be terrified. Because you have no idea what you've just done. It was just junk. She cried, her defensiveness flaring up to protect her from the truth she was starting to feel. It was old. Smelly trash. Our house was embarrassing. I was just trying to help. Help? I shrieked, the sound echoing in the empty space around us. You think this was helping? That wasn't junk. Lily. Every single piece in this garage was chosen for a reason. Every book, every chair, every single dusty thing you were so ashamed of was a piece of a plan. My plan. For you. What plan? She sobbed. You and your stupid secret plans. You never tell me anything. You just hide out in this creepy garage with your garbage and expect me to understand. The injustice of her words, the sheer, blind ignorance of them, snapped the last thread of my control. I was building your future. That's the plan. I screamed, stepping towards her, my finger jabbing in the air. That ugly armchair? That was paying for your textbooks. That stack of records? That was your room and board for freshman year. The box of comic books you couldn't be bothered to look inside? That was your tuition. Lily. All of it. Your entire college fund was in this garage. She stared at me, her face pale, her mouth slightly agape. The tears had stopped. She was frozen in a state of shock and disbelief. No. She whispered. Yes. I hissed. You're lying. Her voice was stronger now, laced with accusation. She was rejecting the reality because it was too monstrous to accept. You're just saying that to be cruel. You're making it up to punish me. Making it up? The rage was a white-hot fire in my veins. I have spent 20 years. Lily. 20 years since your father died. Getting up at dawn to go to flea markets. Spending my nights researching, cleaning, and repairing. Every extra dollar I ever made went into this. Not into vacations. Not into a new car. Not into new clothes for me. It went into this garage. It went into you. It was old stuff, she repeated weakly, shaking her head back and forth, as if she could physically dislodge the words I was saying. You can't pay for college with old stuff. You think the world just throws things away? I demanded. You think because something is old it has no value? That desk I found on the curb? It was a rare Haywood Wakefield, worth $4,000. The paintings stacked against the wall that you called creepy? They were by a local artist from the 1950s whose work is now highly sought after. That's another 10,000. At least. The first edition books. The vintage clothes. The pottery. It all added up. It was a fortune. Lily. A carefully, painstakingly built fortune. I watched the color drain completely from her face as the weight of my words began to land. The sheer, specific detail was becoming impossible to deny. Her delusion was cracking, and the horror of what lay beneath was starting to seep through. I didn't know, she whispered, her whole body starting to tremble. You never told me. I was going to. I cried, the anger momentarily replaced by a wave of crushing grief. I was going to show you the appraisals. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to see your face when you realized you could go to any school you wanted. And it was all paid for. I wanted you to see that all this junk, was love. That's all it ever was. It was just my way of showing you how much I love you. The word hung in the air between us, obscene in its new context. Love. She had taken my love, my life's work, the legacy of her father, and had it hauled away like garbage because she was embarrassed, because she wanted our house to look like something she saw on television. She sank to the floor, her legs giving out from under her. She curled into a ball on the cold concrete, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. The sound was agonizing, but I couldn't bring myself to move towards her. I couldn't offer comfort. There was a chasm between us now, carved out by her actions, as wide and empty as the garage we were standing in. I backed away slowly, out of the garage, out of the sterile, bleach-scented nightmare she had created. I walked through the silent, spotlessly clean kitchen and into the living room. The throw pillows on the couch were perfectly plumped. The remote controls were aligned in a neat row on the coffee table. It was all so tidy, so clean, perfect, beautiful, empty house. A fresh start. I stood in the middle of the room, listening to my daughter's muffled sobs from the garage, and I had never, in my entire life, felt so utterly and completely alone. I don't know how long we stayed like that, frozen in our separate spheres of misery. Me, standing rigid in the sterile perfection of my living room, and she, a crumpled heap of shame on the garage floor. The silence in the house was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It was broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing and the frantic, useless thumping of my own heart. Anger is a fire. It burns hot and bright, consuming everything in its path. But it can't burn forever. Eventually, it runs out of fuel. What's left is a landscape of ash and smoke, cold and gray. The fire in me was dying out, replaced by a creeping, icy numbness. And in that numbness, tiny, stupid seed of hope began to sprout. A mistake. This was all a terrible, catastrophic mistake. But maybe it wasn't too late to fix it. The company. She had said the name. ClearSpace Solutions. My mind, trained by years of emergency room triage, began to work. I needed information. I needed a plan of action. I walked stiffly to the kitchen counter, where Lily had left a neat little pile of mail. Underneath a circular for the local grocery store was a glossy brochure and a receipt. ClearSpace Solutions, reclaim your life. Reclaim your space. The logo was a cheerful, minimalist sun. The receipt was dated 2 days ago. I picked it up with a hand that still trembled slightly. My phone felt unnaturally heavy. I found their number on the receipt and dialed, my thumb hovering over the call button. I could hear Lily stirring in the garage. She appeared in the doorway, her face blotchy and swollen, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and that same, desperate hope that was flickering in me. She didn't speak. She just watched, her entire being focused on the phone in my hand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice, to sound calm and rational. The phone rang twice before a pleasant, professional voice answered. Thank you for calling ClearSpace Solutions. This is Brenda. How can I help you? Hello, Brenda. I began, my voice tighter than I wanted. My name is Sarah Jenkins. My daughter. She hired your service a couple of days ago to clear out our garage at 114 Oak Street in Maple Creek. There was the sound of typing. Yes, ma'am. I have the work order right here. For Lily Jenkins. Completed on the 15th. We hope you're enjoying your newly reclaimed space. The cheerful corporate script felt like a drill boring into my skull. There's been a mistake, I said, speaking quickly. A huge misunderstanding. The items that were removed, they weren't supposed to be taken. I need to get them back. All of them. Across the kitchen, Lily flinched, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. Brenda's tone remained pleasant, but a new, practiced note of caution entered it. Oh, I see. Well, ma'am, our policy for items removed is quite clear. The service agreement, which your daughter would have signed, states that all items are considered forfeit at the time of removal. She's a minor, I said, my voice rising in pitch. She's 17. She couldn't legally sign away property that wasn't hers. The work order states she confirmed she was over 18 and had full authority to dispose of the items. Brenda said calmly. We do have to take our clients at their word. Ma'am. Listen to me. I pleaded, pacing the length of the kitchen. This isn't about a few old chairs. This was a valuable collection of antiques and collectibles. It's worth a great deal of money. It was my daughter's college fund. Pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her shifting gears from customer service to legal liability. I understand your distress, ma'am. However, our process is very efficient. Once items are removed from a property, they are immediately transported to our central processing facility. So they're there? At your facility? Hope surged through me. Wild and fierce. I can come and get them. I'll pay. I'll rent a truck. Whatever it takes. Ma'am, it's not that simple, Brenda said, her voice softening with what sounded like genuine, but unhelpful, pity. At the facility, items are sorted. Anything deemed to have potential resale value, furniture, electronics, things of that nature, are bundled into large, mixed lots and sold to bulk resellers. That happens very quickly, usually within 24 hours. The rest, books, papers, personal effects, are sent for recycling or directly to the landfill. The room began to spin. Mixed lots? Landfill? I'm afraid so. The contents of your garage would have been processed the same day they were picked up. By now. I'm sorry, but it's all gone. Gone. The word was so small, so simple, so final. It landed in the center of my chest and shattered everything inside me. I leaned against the counter for support, my legs suddenly weak. There was a rocking chair, I said, my voice breaking. An old wooden one. It was my daughter's when she was a baby. It wouldn't have looked like much. It was probably in the landfill pile. Is there any way at all to check? Ma'am, we process dozens of jobs a day. That's tons of material. There is absolutely no way to retrieve a specific item once it has entered our system. I'm truly sorry. I closed my eyes. I could see the chair perfectly in my mind. The smooth, worn wood of the arms. The faint scratch on the back where it had bumped against a wall one too many times. I could hear the gentle creak it made on the floorboards. I could feel the weight of a sleeping baby in my arms. Gone. Sorted. Processed. Turned back into meaningless matter. Thank you, Brenda, I whispered. And I hung up the phone. I stood there, staring at the phone, at the receipt, at the cheerful, mocking logo of the sun. The last ember of hope had been extinguished. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. The loss was absolute and irrevocable. I looked up at Lily. She stood in the doorway, a ghost in her own home. The hope had died in her eyes, too, replaced by a bottomless, horrifying understanding. The full weight of what she had done was finally crushing her. It was no longer a fight between a mother and a daughter. This was a fact. A truth certified by a stranger on the phone. Her single, impulsive, ignorant act had consequences that were real and permanent. The anger was gone. The panic was gone. All that was left was a vast, hollow emptiness that mirrored the garage. I felt 100 years old. "I'm going to go for a drive," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. I didn't look at her again. I walked past her, grabbed my keys in my purse, and went out the front door, closing it softly behind me. I couldn't be in that house. I couldn't be near her. I needed air. I needed to be somewhere where I wasn't surrounded by the clean, empty spaces that screamed of everything I had just lost. I drove without thinking, my hands moving automatically on the steering wheel, my foot pressing the accelerator. The familiar streets of Maple Creek blurred past my window, a watercolor painting of suburban tranquility that felt like a cruel joke. Tidy houses with manicured lawns, kids riding bikes on the sidewalk, a dog barking behind a white picket fence. It was a world of normalcy, a world I no longer belonged to. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of lost things. The chipped ceramic of a Roseville vase, the faded cover of a first edition To Kill a Mockingbird, the intricate carving on the leg of a Victorian settee, the warm, analog crackle of a jazz record spinning on a turntable. Each image was a fresh stab of pain. It wasn't just the monetary value, though that loss was staggering. A wound so deep I couldn't yet bring myself to probe its edges. It was the stories, the history, the love. It was 20 years of my life, gone in an afternoon. I felt a sudden, desperate need for a witness. I needed someone else to understand the scale of the catastrophe. Someone who wouldn't think I was just a crazy old woman mourning a pile of junk. There was only one person who would truly get it. I found myself pulling into the small, gravel parking lot of Henderson's Heritage, a dusty little antique shop tucked away on a side street downtown. The sign was hand-painted, the windows crammed with a delightful jumble of old lamps, porcelain dolls, and stacks of leather-bound books. Mr. Henderson had been a friend of my husband's. After Michael died, he became my mentor, the one who taught me to see the hidden value in the things other people threw away. The little bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the smell of old wood, beeswax, and paper enveloped me like a hug. It was the smell my garage used to have. A sob caught in my throat. Mr. Henderson emerged from behind a towering bookcase, a pair of spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He was a kind-faced man in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and a perpetual dusting of what he called historic residue on his tweed jacket. "Sarah," he said, his face breaking into a warm smile. "What a pleasant surprise. Come to show me another one of your magnificent finds?" His smile faltered as he got a better look at my face. "Good Lord. Child. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I croaked. I sank onto a delicate-looking but sturdy velvet armchair near the counter. "It's all gone, Mr. Henderson. Everything. The whole collection." I told him the whole sordid story, my voice flat and monotone, recounting the events with a detached horror, as if I were describing something that had happened to someone else. I told him about my trip to Cleveland, about Lily's surprise, about the company called Clear Space Solutions, and the final, devastating phone call. He listened without interrupting, his kindly expression slowly hardening into one of disbelief, then dawning horror. He took off his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief, a sure sign that he was deeply troubled. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, his gaze lost somewhere in the cluttered depths of his shop. "The Eames table?" he finally asked, his voice a low rumble. I nodded mutely. "The set of silver flatware from the old Barclay estate?" Yes. The Art Deco posters? The first appearance Spider-Man? All of it. I whispered. He let out a long, slow whistle and sank onto a stool behind the counter, looking ashen. He, more than anyone, knew. He had seen most of the key pieces. He had helped me authenticate the pottery, and had given me the name of a reputable comic book appraiser years ago. He understood the scope of what had been lost. That girl, he said, shaking his head slowly. That foolish girl. He wasn't angry. He just sounded profoundly sad. She didn't just throw away some money, Sarah. She threw away her own history. Your history. Michael's. His words, meant to be comforting, landed like another blow. He was right. That's what hurt the most. The money was a practical disaster. But the erasure of our story felt like a violation. Lily hadn't just cleaned out a garage. She had desecrated a memorial. What do I do now? I asked, the question hanging in the dusty air between us. The college acceptance letters will be arriving any day. We have nothing. First thing you do, he said, his voice firm, is you breathe. Then you go home. That child is probably scared out of her wits and drowning in a guilt so deep she can't see the surface. She made a terrible mistake. One of the worst I've ever heard of. But she's still your daughter. I recoiled. I can't face her. I don't know what I'll say. I don't know what I'll do. You don't have to say anything right away, he said gently. Just be there. The house is empty. Sarah, don't you be empty, too. I left his shop feeling a tiny bit steadier, though no less heartbroken. His validation helped. I wasn't crazy. The loss was real. It was monumental. Driving home, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation. Mr. Henderson was right. I had to go home. I had to face her. When I walked through the door, the house was silent. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might have run away. But then I saw her. She was in the kitchen, on her hands and knees, scrubbing the already immaculate floor. A bucket of soapy water sat beside her. She wasn't cleaning because it was dirty. She was cleaning because she didn't know what else to do. It was an act of penance. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her wet hands on her jeans. Mom, she whispered. I didn't say anything. I walked to the refrigerator, opened it, and stared inside, though I had no idea what I was looking for. I tried calling them again, she said, her voice small and shaky. The clear space people. I told them I would pay them to know where the landfill was. I thought, maybe I could go there. Maybe I could look. I closed the refrigerator door. And? They said it was against company policy. They said it was a safety hazard. They hung up on me. She wrung her hands, a gesture of frantic helplessness that was so much like my own. I looked them up online. There are complaints, lawsuits, from people like us, people whose things were taken by mistake. They never get them back. She had been doing research. She had been trying to find a way to undo the undoable. The sight of her, so broken and desperate, should have moved me. But I felt nothing. Just a cold, vast emptiness. I walked over to the kitchen table and sat down. The mail was still sitting there. On top of the pile now was a new letter. A large, official-looking envelope with a fancy crest in the corner. It was from Northwestern University, one of her top choices. I picked it up and slid it open with my thumbnail. Lily watched me. Her breath held. I pulled out the heavy, cream-colored paper and read the first line. Dear M.S. Jenkins, on behalf of the admissions committee, it is my great pleasure to offer you a place in the Northwestern University class of 2024. I read the words without emotion. A few weeks ago, this letter would have been cause for celebration. We would have screamed and hugged and maybe even danced around the kitchen. It would have been the triumphant culmination of her hard work and my long-term planning. Now, it was just a piece of paper. A cruel reminder of a future that no longer existed. I slid the letter across the table towards her. "Congratulations," I said, my voice as flat and gray as the ashes of a dead fire. "You got in." She didn't pick it up. She stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Then she looked at me, her face a mask of pure agony. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she choked out, the words torn from her. "I'm so sorry." Sorry doesn't bring back a first edition Hemingway. "Lily," I said, my voice cold and hard. "Sorry doesn't pay for 4 years of tuition at one of the most expensive schools in the country. Sorry is just a word. It's as empty as our garage." I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the letter, a testament to a dream she had single-handedly destroyed. The days that followed were a masterclass in silence. We moved through the house like ghosts, our paths occasionally crossing in the hallway or the kitchen, a space now charged with a fragile, toxic energy. We'd flinch and retreat to our separate corners, the unspoken words between us building a wall thicker than any sheetrock. I went to work at the hospital, putting on my mask of competent compassion. I would hold a patient's hand, offering words of comfort, all the while feeling like a complete hypocrite. My own emotional well was bone dry. How could I offer solace to strangers when my own home was a wasteland of grief and resentment? At work, the routine was a blessing. The beeping machines, the urgent calls, the sterile smell of antisepticate was a world with clear problems and tangible solutions. I could put in and for, administer medication, chart a patient's progress. I could fix things. But then I would come home, pull into the driveway, and the sight of the closed garage door would hit me like a punch to the gut. The fixing stopped there. Inside that house was a wound so deep, I had no idea how to even begin to clean it, let alone stitch it closed. Lily remained a phantom. I would hear her floorboards creak late at night. I would find a single dirty bowl in the sink in the morning, proof that she had eaten something. She didn't play music. Her phone, once a constant source of chatter and ringing, was silent. I think she had turned it off. The house was a tomb, and the letters kept coming. Each day, the mail slot would clink, and another large, ostentatious envelope would land on the floor. Boston University, the University of Michigan, NYU. Each one was a fresh twist of the knife. I would pick them up and place them in a neat, ever-growing stack on the dining room table, which no one used anymore. They were like funeral wreaths laid out for a dead dream. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, I knew I couldn't go on like this. The silence was no longer a buffer. It was a poison, seeping into the very foundations of our lives. The uncertainty was a different kind of pain, a dull, constant ache. We needed the sharp, clean agony of truth. I found her in her room, sitting on her bed, staring at the wall. The acceptance letters were spread out around her like a tarot reading of a future that would never be. "Lily," I said from the doorway. My voice sounded rusty from disuse. She flinched, startled. "Mom, come to the kitchen," I said. It wasn't a request. "We need to talk." She followed me silently, her head bowed. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had told her the collection was her college fund. This time, I had a different set of papers with me. I had spent the previous night not sleeping, but printing bank statements, my pay stubs, tuition and fee schedules I downloaded from the university websites. I had created a spreadsheet, a brutal accounting of our new reality. I laid the first page on the table. It was the estimated cost of attendance for 1 year at Northwestern. Tuition, room and board, books, fees. The number at the bottom was obscene, a figure so large it looked like a misprint. Nearly $80,000. "This is your first choice," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. For 1 year. Multiply this by 4. And you get. I pushed another piece of paper towards her. The total was over $300,000. I then laid out my own financial information. My take-home pay as a senior nurse. Our monthly mortgage payment. Utilities. Groceries. Car insurance. The numbers were stark and unforgiving. After all our essential expenses were paid, the amount left over was modest, barely enough for a small emergency, let alone a savings plan. Our actual savings account, the one for a new water heater or a major car repair, contained less than $5,000. This, I said, tapping the spreadsheet, is what we have. This, I tapped the university cost sheet, is what we need. I let her look at the numbers. I let the silence stretch, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator. I watched her eyes trace the columns, her brow furrowing as she did the impossible math in her head. I could see the moment the last vestiges of denial crumbled. This wasn't me being punishing. This wasn't an exaggeration. This was fact. This was a balance sheet from which there was no escape. But, what about student loans? She whispered, her voice hoarse. And financial aid? We would have gotten something, right? We would have. I agreed, my voice softening just a fraction. With our income, you would have qualified for some grants, some aid. And yes, we could have taken out loans. But there's a limit to federal loans. The rest would have to be private loans, with higher interest rates. We would have been looking at a mountain of debt. Lily, a crippling amount. But it was a mountain I was prepared to climb with you, because I had the means to pay most of it off as we went. The collection, it was our safety net. It was our ladder. It was everything. I took a deep breath. That ladder is gone now. The safety net is gone. We can't take on that kind of debt. It would ruin us both. I would have to work until I was 80. You would graduate with a mortgage-sized loan that would dictate every choice you make for the next 30 years. She stared at the papers, her shoulders slumping. The fight had gone out of her completely. She looked small and broken. So what do we do? She asked, the question a fragile puff of air. These are our options, I said, pulling out 2 more brochures I had picked up that afternoon. One was for Maple Creek Community College. The other was for a small, local state university about an hour's drive away. Community college is affordable, I explained, my voice clinical again. You could live at home, get your core credits. If you get a perfect GPA, you might be able to transfer to a better school in 2 years, maybe with a scholarship. That's a big if, but it's a path. Or, I continued, pushing the other brochure forward. There's North Ohio State. It's a decent school. Not a top-tier one. But it's solid. The tuition is a fraction of what Northwestern costs. Even then, it would be a struggle. You would have to apply for every loan you could get. You would have to work at least 20 hours a week. Every week. And I would have to take on every overtime shift I can get at the hospital. Our lives, for the next 4 years, would be nothing but work and school. No extras. No breathing room. I sat back, letting the 2 options lie there on the table. A stark choice between a shattered dream and a grueling reality. Her face crumpled. This was it. The final, irreversible consequence. The death of the future she had taken for granted. I'll get a job, she said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. 2 jobs. I'll work all summer. I'll save every penny. I can pay you back. I can earn it back. The naivety of it, the childish belief that this could be fixed with a summer of scooping ice cream, was almost too much to bear. A flicker of the old anger sparked in me, but I stamped it out. It was pointless. Lily, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I know you mean that, but you need to understand the scale of what is gone. You could work every day for the next 10 years and you wouldn't earn back the value of just that one comic book. Or the Eames table. Or the art. This isn't a debt you can repay with a part-time job. This is a loss. We just have to live with it. That was the moment she truly broke. A low, wounded sound escaped her lips, and she buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with violent sobs. It wasn't the performative crying of a teenager caught doing wrong. It was the deep, soul-shattering grief of someone who has just understood the full magnitude of their mistake, who has looked into the abyss and seen their own handiwork at the bottom. I didn't reach for her. I couldn't. The chasm between us was still too wide. Mr. Henderson's words came back to me. The house is empty. Sarah, don't you be empty, too. But I was. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean of everything but exhaustion. My 20-year mission, the sole focus of my life since Michael's death, had been to launch this girl into the world, to give her the perfect start I never had. And it had all been undone in a single afternoon of youthful ignorance. I wasn't just grieving the loss of the collection. I was grieving my own purpose. I was a failure. I stood up from the table, my joints aching. You need to decide, I said quietly. Community college or the state school? The application deadlines are coming up. We don't have much time. I left her there, sobbing over the brochures and the balance sheets. I walked into the living room and stood by the window, looking out at the darkening street. The house was so tidy, so organized, so empty. It was a perfect reflection of my heart. We had lost the past and the future all at once. All that was left was this unbearable, silent present. This was our new reality. This was what was left. The decision was made without another formal discussion. A few days later, I found the application for Maple Creek Community College, filled out in Lily's neat, careful handwriting, sitting on the kitchen counter. There was a small, sticky note attached to it. I'll take care of the application fee. Please just check it over. I read through the application. Her essays were well written, though devoid of the passion and excitement that had filled her applications to the big universities. It was the writing of someone going through the motions, someone resigned to their fate. There was no joy in it. I checked it over, made one small correction, and left it on the counter for her to find. The next day, it was gone. The transaction was complete. And then, something began to shift. It wasn't a sudden change, not a dramatic clearing of the air. It was quieter, slower, almost imperceptible at first. The crushing weight of the unknown had been lifted, replaced by the grim certainty of our path. And in that certainty, Lily started to move. She got a job. Not one, but just as she had promised. From 3 in the afternoon until 10 at night. 4 days a week. She worked at the local supermarket, stocking shelves and bagging groceries. Her weekends were spent behind the counter at a bustling downtown coffee shop, from opening at 6 in the morning until closing at 4. I saw her less than ever, but I felt her presence more. She would come home late, smelling of stale coffee or the cold air of the grocery store's produce section. I would hear her showering, the soft footsteps as she crept to her room. In the mornings, when I left for my own shift, I'd find the coffee pot clean and ready, a single mug set out for me. She was trying to apologize in the only way she knew how. Through acts of service. Through exhausting, relentless work. She started leaving cash on the counter. A crumpled $20 bill. A few fives. A small pile of coins. I knew it was her tip money from the coffee shop. The first time I saw it, I almost told her to keep it. But I looked at the small, humble offering, and I understood. It wasn't about the money. It was a sacrament. A desperate, tangible offering of remorse. So I took it, and I put it in a jar on top of the refrigerator labeled groceries. I never mentioned it, and neither did she. It became another part of our silent routine. One Saturday, On my day off, I found myself with an empty house and a gnawing restlessness. I couldn't stand the silence, the pristine tidiness. On an impulse, I drove to a flea market in a neighboring town, a place I hadn't been to in months. I told myself I was just going for a walk, to get some air. But it was a lie. I was a moth drawn to a flame, even a flame that had burned me. The place was a riot of color and noise. The familiar smell of dusty canvas, fried onions, and old treasures filled the air. I wandered through the aisles, my eyes scanning the tables piled high with other people's cast-offs. A part of me, the collector, the treasure hunter, was searching for a spark, a hint of magic, a forgotten painting, a box of old books. But the magic was gone. I saw everything through a new, cynical lens. It was all just stuff. Stuff that could be hauled away in a truck and dumped in a landfill without a second thought. My passion had been hollowed out, replaced with a profound sense of futility. I was about to leave when I saw it. A small, familiar booth run by a man I'd bought from a few times over the years. His specialty was old books and ephemera. And sitting in a cardboard box on his table was a small stack of vintage comic books. My heart gave a painful lurch. I walked over, my hands in my pockets. I couldn't bring myself to touch them. The man looked up and smiled. "Sarah, long time no see. Looking for anything special today?" "Just looking," I mumbled. My eyes scanned the titles. Old issues of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. Nothing particularly rare. But they were from the right era. They felt like ghosts. I thought of my own box. The one with the pristine Spider-Man one. The one with the Fantastic Four collection. My life's greatest find. Gone. "Find anything good lately?" the man asked, making small talk. I shook my head. "No. I'm not really collecting anymore." The words felt strange on my tongue, like a renunciation of faith. I turned to leave. But then my gaze fell on something else on his table. A small, leather-bound volume. It was a book of poetry. Picked it up. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. It was an older edition, maybe from the 1940s. It wasn't a valuable first edition, but it was beautiful. The leather was soft and worn. I opened it, and the smell of old paper was so familiar it made my chest ache. Inside the front cover was an inscription, written in elegant, faded cursive. "To my dearest Eleanor. In this, may you find the universe. All my love. Thomas. June 1948. A whole life, a whole love story, contained in a few words. This book had been cherished. It had been a gift. Thomas had given it to Eleanor. And now it was here, on a dusty table, being sold for $5. It was just like my things. A story, discarded and forgotten by everyone except the one who remembered. I bought the book. I didn't know why. It felt like an act of rescue. When I got home, Lily was there, asleep on the couch. She was still in her coffee shop uniform, an apron bundled up beside her. She looked exhausted, younger than her 17 years. Her face, in sleep, was free from the guilt and anxiety that had become her constant companions. She was just my daughter. My tired, broken daughter. I stood there for a long moment, looking at her. The anger I had been nursing for weeks, the cold, hard stone of it in my chest, began to soften. Didn't disappear. But some of the sharp edges wore away. She was paying for her mistake. Every single day. She was paying for it. In lost sleep, in aching feet, in the death of her own dreams. I quietly placed the old book of poetry on the coffee table beside her. I didn't know if she would notice it or care. But it felt important. Felt like placing a single, small stone on a vast, empty grave. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. It was a whisper in the overwhelming silence. A recognition that some things, some stories, were still worth saving. The summer wore on. Thick and hot. Our new rhythm became a strange kind of normal. The house remained a quiet, carefully navigated space. But the oppressive, suffocating silence had eased. It was now more of a fragile truce. A shared landscape of grief we were both learning to inhabit. We spoke, but only about practical things. The car needs gas. I'm working late tonight. Don't forget to take the trash out. The small talk of strangers sharing a roof. But I noticed things. I noticed the book of poetry, Leaves of Grass, had moved from the coffee table to the small nightstand beside her bed. I noticed she had started to read again, something she hadn't done for pleasure in years. I noticed she was spending her rare hours off not with friends, but in the library, poring over books about art history and antique furniture. She never mentioned it to me, but I would see the library books on her desk when I passed her open bedroom door. She was trying to learn the language of the world she had destroyed. It was her own quiet, painful penance, and it touched a place in me I thought had died. The jar on top of the refrigerator was slowly filling with her crumpled bills and loose change. Every time I looked at it, I felt a complex pang of emotions. Sadness for the necessity of it, pride in her relentless effort, and a deep, aching pity for the daughter who was trying so desperately to fill an ocean with a thimble. One sweltering afternoon in late July, my sister Carol came over. She let herself in with the key I'd given her. Her cheerful, booming voice a shock to the quiet house. "Sarah? You home? I brought iced tea." She found me in the kitchen, staring into the open, and mostly empty, refrigerator. She set a large pitcher down on the counter and surveyed the scene. She took in my tired face, the jar of money, the profound quiet of the house. Carol had a way of seeing right through to the heart of things. "Good Lord, Sarah," she said, her voice softening. "How long are you going to keep this up?" "Keep what up?" I asked, closing the refrigerator. "This. The silent treatment. The walking on eggshells. The two of you living like sad little ghosts in this house. It's been months." "It's not a silent treatment," I said defensively. "We're fine. We're just busy." Carol snorted, pouring 2 tall glasses of tea and sliding one across the counter to me. "Don't give me that. I'm your sister. I know you. You're punishing her. And you're punishing yourself right along with her." She threw away my life's work. "Carol," I said, my voice low and tight. "She threw away her own future. What am I supposed to do? Pretend it didn't happen?" "No, you don't pretend it didn't happen," she said, her gaze firm and unwavering. "You talk about it. You yell. You scream. You cry. You do whatever you need to do. And then you figure out how to forgive her. 'Cause if you don't, this bitterness is going to eat you alive. It's already started." I sank onto a stool, the cold glass of tea sweating in my hands. I don't know how. Every time I look at her, all I see is that empty garage. All I see is everything we've lost. "And what do you think she sees when she looks at you?" Carol asked gently. "You think she's not reminded of it every single second of every single day? That girl is carrying a mountain of guilt on her shoulders. She's working 2 jobs. She's given up on her dreams. She's trying to learn about all the things she threw away. She is doing everything she can to show you how sorry she is. When are you going to let yourself see it?" Her words hit their mark. I knew she was right. My anger, my grief, had become a shield. It was easier to hold on to the resentment than to face the terrifying vulnerability of forgiveness. Forgiving her meant accepting the loss was permanent. It meant letting go of the person I was before, the secret planner, the curator of dreams, and figuring out who I was now. It meant starting over. And I was so tired of starting over. "She's a good kid, Sarah," Carol said, her voice soft. "She made a stupid, horrible, teenage mistake. But she's not a bad person. Don't lose your daughter over a bunch of stuff. Even really, Really valuable stuff. After Carol left, her words echoed in the quiet kitchen. Don't lose your daughter over a bunch of stuff. Was that what I was doing? In my grief over the things I had lost, was I pushing away the one person who mattered more than all of them combined? That evening, I was heading to bed when I heard a small sound from the living room. I peeked in. Lily was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her library books. She had a sketchbook open on her lap and was carefully trying to draw the graceful curve of a chair leg from a picture in one of the books. Her tongue was stuck out in concentration, just like it used to when she was a little girl learning to write her name. She looked up, startled, and immediately tried to hide the sketchbook. It's okay, I said, my voice softer than it had been in months. Let me see. Hesitantly, she handed it to me. The drawing was clumsy, the proportions all wrong, but it was instantly recognizable. It was the Haywood Wakefield desk, the one I'd found on the curb. I was just trying to remember them, she said, her voice barely a whisper. All the things from the garage. I check out these books and I try to find things that look like them, so I won't forget what they looked like, so I can remember what I did. My heart cracked open. All this time, I thought she was just learning about antiques. I didn't realize she was building her own memorial, a catalog of loss drawn in pencil in a cheap sketchbook. She wasn't just learning about their value. She was trying to reclaim their memory. I sat down on the floor next to her. The first time we had been that close in a long time. I pointed to a page in one of her books. It showed a brightly colored Art Deco poster. There was one like that, I said, my voice thick with emotion. For a French aperitif. It had a woman with a big orange hat. Lily's eyes widened. She quickly flipped through her sketchbook and found a blank page. Show me, she said. Draw it. How you remember it. So I did. My own drawing was just as clumsy as hers. I was a nurse, not an artist. But as I sketched the rough outline of the woman and her hat, I started to describe it. I told her how I'd found it at the bottom of a box at an estate sale. How the colors were so vibrant I couldn't believe it had survived all those years. I told her about the artist, and how his work had become popular again. Then Lily pointed to another picture. Piece of pottery. What about the vase? The one you said was Roseville. And so I described it. The shape, the color, the way the light hit the glaze. She sketched as I spoke, her pencil flying across the page. For the first time since that horrible day, we weren't talking about the money. We were talking about the things themselves. We were sharing the stories. We were rebuilding the collection, not with physical objects, but with shared memory. We sat there on the floor for hours, long after the moon had risen, filling the empty pages of her sketchbook with the ghosts of my lost treasures. The wall between us, built of silence and resentment, was finally starting to come down, brick by painful brick. The sketchbook became our bridge. It was a fragile, tentative structure, but it was strong enough to bear the weight of our shared grief. Every few nights, we would sit on the living room floor, surrounded by her library books, and I would describe another piece from memory. The ornate pattern on the Barclay Estate silver. The bold, graphic cover of the first Fantastic Four comic. The intricate inlay on a small, wooden music box Michael had given me on our first anniversary. As I spoke, I watched Lily draw. She was getting better. She had a good eye, a steady hand. She was learning to see the way I saw, to appreciate the lines, the craftsmanship, the history, and trying to understand my world. She was discovering a part of herself she never knew existed. She wasn't just drawing objects. She was learning a new language. A language of beauty, of history, of value that went far beyond a price tag. The air in the house was lighter. We started talking about other things. Her jobs. My work. A funny thing a customer had said at the coffee shop. A difficult patient at the hospital. Ordinary details of our separate lives began to weave back together. creating a new, shared tapestry. It wasn't the same as before. The old pattern was gone forever. But this new one had its own strength, its own quiet beauty. One crisp Saturday morning in early September, just a few weeks before she was due to start classes at the community college, Lily came to me with a proposal. "There's a big outdoor antique fair over in Millersburg this weekend," she said, her voice nervous but determined. "It's one of the biggest in the state." I thought, maybe we could go together. I hesitated. The last time I had gone to a flea market, it had been a painful, disillusioning experience. I wasn't sure I was ready. Sensing my reluctance, she added quickly, "We don't have to buy anything. I just want to see it. With you. I want you to show me things. To teach me." She held up her sketchbook. "It's one thing to see them in a book. I want to see them for real." There was such a raw, pleading hope in her eyes. I couldn't say no. Forgiving her was one thing. Actively rebuilding our bond was another. This was her reaching for my hand. I had to reach back. "Okay," I said, a real smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time in an eternity. "Let's go." The fair was enormous, a sprawling city of tents and tables set up in a massive field. It was overwhelming. A cacophony of vendors hawking their wares and collectors haggling over prices. The old me would have been in heaven, energized by the thrill of the hunt. The new me felt a familiar pang of anxiety. But then I looked at Lily. Her eyes were wide with wonder, taking it all in. She wasn't looking for deals or hidden treasures. She was just looking. She pointed to a set of brightly colored Fiesta-ware plates. "Is that like the ones you had?" I nodded. Mine were the original red. That color had a bit of uranium in the glaze. They had to stop making it. Makes it more valuable. She absorbed the information. Her brow furrowed in concentration. We walked for hours. I showed her the difference between real depression glass and cheap reproductions. I explained how to identify the maker's mark on a piece of pottery. I pointed out the telltale signs of a badly repaired piece of furniture. I was teaching her the trade, sharing the knowledge I had spent 20 years accumulating. And she was a rapt student, soaking it all in, asking intelligent questions, filling the pages of her sketchbook with quick, observant drawings. For the first time, I felt a flicker of the old excitement. The passion wasn't dead. It was just dormant. Sharing it with her, seeing the world of forgotten things through her fresh, curious eyes, was like a gentle rain on dry ground. We were in a crowded tent, filled with old tools and rusty farm equipment. When it happened, Lily had wandered over to a table piled high with what looked like junk old kitchen utensils, chipped enamelware, tarnished silver plate trays. I was about to call her over when she let out a small gasp. She was holding something in her hand. It was a small, wooden box, dark with age and grime. It was square, with a small, brass latch. It looked utterly unremarkable. But as I got closer, my heart began to pound in my chest. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I knew that box. It was the music box. The one Michael had given me. The one whose memory was so sacred. I'd barely been able to describe it to her without choking up. It had a small, almost invisible crack on the lid, right near the hinge. "Mom?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes filled with a wild, impossible hope. "Is this?" I took it from her, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. It was heavier than I remembered. The wood was cold. I ran my thumb over the crack on the lid. It was real. This wasn't a similar box. This was the box. My breath hitched. How was it here? In a pile of junk on a table in a field? 60 miles from my home? It was impossible. A miracle. It must have been sorted into a lot, sold to a reseller, passed from hand to hand until it ended up here, waiting for us. One small piece of our history, washed back ashore by an indifferent ocean. I fumbled with the latch. It was stiff. With a final click, sprang open. Inside, the small, brass cylinder and comb were tarnished but intact. I gently wound the small key on the bottom. For a moment, there was only silence. I thought it was broken. And then, it began to play. Tinny, delicate melody. A little hesitant at first, then clearer. It was Our Love Is Here to Stay, the song we had danced to at our wedding. The sound shattered the dam inside me. The grief, the anger, the bitterness I had held onto for so long. All of it dissolved in a flood of hot, cleansing tears. I wasn't crying for the things I had lost anymore. I was crying for this one impossible thing I had found. I was crying for my husband's memory, which felt so vivid and close in that moment. I was crying for my daughter, whose terrible mistake had somehow, miraculously, led us back to this single, perfect moment of grace. Lily was crying too, silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't say anything. She just put her arm around my shoulders, her touch firm and comforting. We stood there in the middle of a crowded tent, surrounded by strangers and forgotten objects, and we cried together. The vendor, a grizzled old man in overalls, looked at us with bemused curiosity. "That little box means something to you ladies?" I wiped my eyes and nodded, unable to speak. "How much?" Lily asked, her voice thick but steady. She was already reaching into her pocket, pulling out the wad of cash from her coffee shop tips. The man looked at the box, then at our tear-streaked faces. He shrugged. "Ah, give me $5. Just an old box." Lily didn't haggle. She handed him a $10 bill and said, "Keep the change." We walked out of the tent, back into the bright sunlight. I was still clutching the music box to my chest as if it were a living thing. It was more than just a box. It was a symbol. It was proof that not everything that is lost is gone forever. It was forgiveness, made of wood and brass. It was hope, playing a tinny, beautiful song. The drive home from the antique fair was different. The silence wasn't heavy or fragile. It was peaceful. The music box sat on the dashboard between us, silent, powerful testament to the day's miracle. I would glance at it, then at Lily, and a feeling of profound, quiet joy would wash over me. We had lost a fortune, but we had found something so much more valuable. We had found our way back to each other. When we got home, I placed the music box not in the empty garage, but on the mantelpiece in the living room. It was the first object I had placed there in months. It looked small and unassuming, but it changed the entire room. It filled the space with its presence, with its history. It was a start. That evening, we didn't sit on the floor. We sat on the couch, side by side, and Lily opened her sketchbook. But this time, she wasn't trying to recreate a memory from my description. She was drawing the music box from life, capturing the grain of the wood, the tarnish on the brass, the small, perfect crack on the lid. "It's funny," she said softly, her pencil moving across the paper. "All those months, I was so obsessed with what everything was worth. The money, the college fund. I saw it all as a number." "It's hard not to," I said. "It was a very big number." "Yeah," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "But this," she tapped the music box with her finger. "This little thing. The man sold it for $5. It has no real monetary value, but it's the most valuable thing we have. Isn't it?" "Yes," I whispered, my heart full. "It is." She had finally understood. It had taken a catastrophe, months of guilt, and a one-in-a-million miracle, but she finally understood the real meaning of the things we keep. It was never just about the money. It was about the stories, the love, the history, the things that tether us to who we are. The start of the semester at Maple Creek Community College arrived. Not with the fanfare and excitement of moving into a dorm at a big university, but with the quiet routine of Lily packing a lunch and driving off in our old sedan. There was no tearful goodbye at a campus gate. There was just a simple, "Have a good day, sweetie," as she walked out the door. But there was no bitterness in it. There was acceptance. There was a quiet determination in the set of her jaw. She had a new plan now, one she had made for herself. She would ace her classes. She would save her money. She would transfer in 2 years. This wasn't a punishment anymore. It was her path. A path she was choosing to walk with her head held high. With Lily out of the house during the day, I found myself adrift in the quiet rooms. The empty garage was a constant, looming presence. I still avoided it, keeping the door firmly closed. It was a tomb, and I was afraid to disturb the ghosts. One Saturday, I was sorting through a stack of mail when my sister Carol called. "So," she said, her voice bright, "I have a crazy idea. Don't hang up." "I'm listening," I said, smiling. Carol's crazy ideas were often brilliant. "You know my friend, Maria? The one who's a real estate agent? Well, she has a client, an older woman who's downsizing, and she needs someone to help her clear out her house. Not a junk hauling service," she added quickly, "but someone who knows what they're looking at. Someone who can tell her what's valuable, what's worth consigning, and what's just stuff. She's overwhelmed and doesn't want to get taken advantage of." I was silent. "I told her about you, Sarah," Carol pressed on. "I told her you have the best eye of anyone I know. It would be a paid gig, just to consult." My first instinct was to say no. It was too close to the bone. To walk through someone else's collection, someone else's lifetime of accumulation, felt like a special kind of torture. But then I thought about it. All that knowledge I had, all those years of research and learning, what was I doing with it? Letting it rot inside me like an old wound? Maybe this was a way forward. Not as a collector, but as something else. A guardian. A storyteller. "Okay," I said, surprising myself. "Give her my number." A week later, I found myself standing on the doorstep of a beautiful old Victorian house, feeling a nervous flutter in my stomach. The owner, a woman named Mrs. Gable, was a tiny, elegant lady in her late 80s with sharp, intelligent eyes. She led me through rooms filled to the brim with a lifetime of treasures. Fine china, antique furniture, beautiful paintings, boxes of old letters and photographs. It was like walking through a more refined, more curated version of my own lost collection. But instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I wasn't here to acquire anything. I was here to help. I spent the day with her, carefully going through each room. I identified a rare set of porcelain figurines. I pointed out that a dark, gloomy painting in the hallway was actually a valuable piece by a well-known regional artist, just in need of a good cleaning. I found a box of her late husband's military medals and told her how to have them properly mounted and preserved. With each discovery, Mrs. Gable's face lit up. "Oh my goodness," she'd say. "I had no idea. I was just going to give that to charity." I was helping her see the story of her own life, a story she had forgotten or taken for granted. I was giving her back her own history. By the end of the day, we had a plan. Certain pieces would go to an auction house, others to a consignment shop, and the most precious things, the letters and photos and medals, would be carefully packed for her to take to her new, smaller apartment. As I was leaving, she pressed a check into my hand. It was more than I had expected. "Thank you, my dear," she said, her eyes shining. "You have a gift. You don't just see old things. You see the life inside them." I drove home with the check in my purse and a feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Pride. I hadn't been a failure. My passion, my knowledge still had value, could still do good. That night, for the first time, I opened the door to the garage and walked inside. The smell of bleach was long gone, replaced by the neutral smell of concrete and dust. It was still empty, still a wound, but it didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a blank page. Lily came home late from her shift at the supermarket. She found me sitting on an upturned bucket in the middle of the empty garage, a can of paint and a brush beside me. The music box was on the floor, playing its tinny, hopeful tune. She stopped in the doorway, a look of surprise on her face. "What are you doing?" she asked. I looked around at the stark, white walls. "I was thinking," I said, dipping the brush into the can. "This is a pretty big space." I stood up and painted a single, bold stroke of warm, buttery yellow on the white wall. It was a color of sunshine, of new beginnings. "We've lost a lot," I said, turning to her. "But we still have the stories. And we have this." I gestured around the empty space. A place to start over. Together. Lily's eyes filled with tears. But this time, they were tears of relief. Of joy. She walked over, took the brush from my hand, and painted her own stroke of yellow right next to mine. "What are we going to build?" she asked, her voice full of a cautious, fragile excitement. I looked at her. My daughter, who had grown so much, who had walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. I looked at the 2 yellow stripes on the wall, the beginning of something new. "I have no idea," I said. And for the first time, the not knowing felt like freedom. "But we'll figure it out." We stood there for a long time, side by side, looking at our 2 small brushstrokes in the vast emptiness, and we both started to smile. The house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility.